The stars had never seemed so cold to Captain Day-Wan as they did on that terrible day. He stood in the grand chamber of Primus' throne, the capital world of the Valthic Imperium, surrounded by architecture that made Earth's greatest buildings look like children's toys. The wall stretched up so high that clouds formed near the ceiling. Holographic displays showed thousands of worlds under Valthic control, each one a jewel in an empire that had lasted 40,000 years. Day-Wan had come here with hope. 3 years ago, humanity made first contact with the Valthic Imperium. It seemed like a miracle. Earth had finally found neighbors among the stars. The Valthic possessed technology that seemed like magic. They could travel across the galaxy in days. They could cure any disease. They promised to welcome humanity into galactic civilization. But something had felt wrong from the start. The Valthic officials never quite looked at humans as equals. They studied Earth's people like scientists examining insects. They asked strange questions about human history, about wars and conflicts, about genetic heritage. Day-Wan had dismissed his concerns. Every culture had different customs, he told himself. Perhaps this was just how ancient civilizations behaved. Now he understood the truth, and it was worse than anything he could have imagined. High Chancellor Vorth stood before the human delegation. He was tall, even by Valthic standards, with silver skin that seemed to glow with inner light. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence as he regarded the humans with something between pity and contempt. Beside him, Arbiter Quen held a data tablet that contained humanity's fate. "We have completed our assessment," Vorth announced. His voice translated instantly into English by the universal communicators. As per the Valthic Codex, all species must be properly classified before they can participate in galactic society. This classification is based on evolutionary merit, scientific analysis, and historical review. Day-Wan felt his heart pounding. Around him, the other human diplomats stood rigid with tension. Dr. Young-Mi, Earth's leading xenobiologist, had her hands clenched into fists. Ambassador He-Wan, who would later become Earth's president, kept her face carefully neutral. Arbiter Quen stepped forward. "Humanity has been classified as Class 7 beings," he said simply. The words hung in the air like poison. Day-Wan had studied the Valthic classification system during the journey here. Class 1 beings were the Valthic themselves, the pinnacle of evolution. Class 2 through 6 were various levels of civilized species, each with different rights and privileges. Class 7 was the lowest classification. Class 7 meant slaves. "That's impossible," Dr. Young-Mi said, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "We are a sentient species. We have art, science, philosophy. We've achieved faster than light travel. We have rights under any reasonable standard of—" "The classification is not negotiable," Vorth interrupted. "The Codex is clear. Humanity exhibits multiple markers of inferior development. Your species has engaged in constant warfare throughout your history. You took 12,000 years to develop space travel, when most civilized species accomplish this in 2,000 years. Your genetic structure shows evidence of interbreeding with extinct subspecies, indicating biological impurity. Most critically, you lack any natural psionic or telepathic abilities. These factors combine to place you firmly in Class 7. Day-Wan found his voice. "You're condemning an entire species to slavery because we're different from you? Because we evolved differently?" "We are not condemning you," Arbiter Quen said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "We are simply recognizing what you are. The Codex exists to maintain order in the galaxy. For 40,000 years it has prevented chaos. 200 species have attempted to resist their proper classification. All 200 are now extinct. We do not wish this fate for humanity, but the choice is yours." The chamber fell silent. Through the massive windows, Day-Wan could see Valthic warships hanging in orbit like metal moons. Each one could destroy a planet. The Imperium had millions of such ships. Earth's entire fleet numbered just 400 vessels, most of them exploration ships poorly suited for combat. "We need time," Ambassador He-Wan said carefully. "Time to discuss this with our government. To consider our options." Vorth inclined his head. "You have 1 standard month. Return to Earth. Deliver our assessment. When you return, you will either accept your classification and integration into the Imperium as a productive slave species, or you will be eliminated. These are the only options. The Codex allows for no others." The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. Day-Wan spent most of that time staring out at the stars, wondering if humanity would even exist in a few months. The crew spoke in hushed voices about war, about resistance, about the impossibility of their situation. How could Earth fight an empire that controlled 8,000 worlds? How could 400 ships stand against millions? When they arrived home, Fleet Admiral Tae Yang met them at the orbital station above Earth. The Admiral's face was grim. "We've been monitoring Valthic activity," he said quietly. They didn't wait for our answer. "Colony ships have gone silent. New Busan, Harmony Station. 3 other colonies. They're already taking our people." The news hit like a physical blow. Captain Bo-Ra of New Busan had sent a final desperate transmission before her colony went dark. Valthic warships had descended from the sky. They were herding people like cattle. She begged for help that never came. Then the transmission ended. President Haewon addressed Earth from the United Nations building. Every human in the 13 colonies watched. She stood at the podium, her face projected on billions of screens, and spoke with quiet fury. "The Valthic Imperium has proclaimed that humanity is not worthy of freedom. They have decided that our history, our biology, our very nature makes us suitable only for slavery. They have already begun taking our people from the outer colonies. They expect us to submit, to bow, to accept their judgment of our worth." She paused, letting the words sink in. Then her voice grew stronger. "Earth's answer is no. We do not accept their classification. We do not recognize their authority to judge us. We do not bow to anyone, no matter how powerful they claim to be. Humanity has faced extinction before. We have survived ice ages and plagues. We have overcome tyranny and genocide. We will survive this too, or we will die as free people. But we will never be slaves." The speech should have been hopeless. Everyone knew Earth couldn't win a conventional war. But something else was happening behind the scenes. Commander Jae-sung, head of Earth's Special Operations, had been working on contingency plans since first contact went wrong. Dr. Minho, a brilliant neuroscientist, had proposals that sounded like science fiction. Engineer Soo-jin claimed she could hide entire fleets from Valthic sensors. In a secret bunker beneath Geneva, Earth's best minds gathered around a table. They had 1 month before the ultimatum expired. 1 month to find a way to fight an enemy that had conquered the galaxy. "They think they know what we are," Commander Jae-sung said, spreading holographic star maps across the table. "They've classified us based on our past. But they don't understand humanity's greatest strength. We adapt, we evolve. We become whatever we need to become to survive." Dr. Youngmi looked at the classified files they'd managed to steal from Valthic databases during the diplomatic mission. Information about their biology, their technology, their psychology. "They're not invincible," she said slowly. "They're just old. So old they've forgotten how to change, how to fear. Then we'll teach them," President Haewon said. "We'll teach them what it means to threaten humanity. We'll teach them fear. And we'll teach them that some species should never be pushed into a corner." The clock was ticking. The Valthic Imperium expected submission or death. They had crushed 200 species that resisted. They had ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years without challenge. They had never encountered humanity before. They had no idea what was coming. Earth changed in ways that frightened even those who planned it. Every factory, every laboratory, every research facility was repurposed overnight. Resources flowed toward a single goal that consumed the planet like wildfire, survival, evolution, transformation, into something the Valthic Imperium could not predict or control. Dr. Minho stood in the underground facility beneath the Korean peninsula, watching through reinforced glass as the first volunteers underwent the procedure. His daughter Jisoo had been taken in the New Busan abduction. He would never see her again. That loss had turned him from a cautious scientist into something harder, colder, more determined. Project Ascension was his answer to the Imperium. If humanity couldn't match Valthic technology, they would surpass Valthic biology. The volunteers were soldiers, scientists, and civilians who understood the risks. The process was brutal. Genetic modifications rewrote their DNA. Cybernetic implants merged with their nervous systems. Quantum neural networks linked their minds in ways that blurred the line between individual and collective. Some didn't survive. Those who did emerged changed. Faster, stronger, capable of processing information at speeds that made computers seem slow. "How do you feel?" Dr. Minho asked the first successful subject, a young soldier named Hyunwoo. The soldier flexed his hands, staring at them as if seeing them for the first time. "Like I was asleep my whole life and just woke up." I can feel the electrical signals in the walls. I can hear conversations 3 floors down. My thoughts are faster, clearer. He looked up at Dr. Minho with eyes that now had faint silver circuits visible in the iris. I'm still me. But I'm more than I was. Across Earth's orbital stations, Engineer Su-Jin was creating something equally revolutionary. The Ghost Protocol. She had studied Valthic sensor technology and found its weakness. The Imperium's ship scanned for matter, energy, and gravitational signatures. They were incredibly sophisticated, capable of detecting a single ship across light years. But they couldn't detect something that existed in quantum superposition, something that was everywhere and nowhere until it chose to be observed. The first test nearly failed. A human frigate attempted to enter ghost state and vanished from all sensors. For 3 hours, no one could locate it. Su-Jin began to fear it had been destroyed or lost in some unknown dimension. Then it reappeared exactly where predicted, its crew shaken but alive. They had existed in a state where they could observe the universe, but the universe couldn't observe them back. It works, the captain reported, his voice filled with wonder and fear. We were invisible. Completely invisible. We flew past a Valthic patrol ship at close range. They never knew we were there. 6 months after the proclamation, the Imperium made its first major move. A harvester fleet of 30 ships arrived at Harmony Station, where 5,000 humans had remained despite evacuation orders. These were farmers, engineers, families who refused to abandon their homes. The Valthic expected easy prey. They had done this countless times before with countless other species. Captain Dong-hyun was waiting for them. His strike force consisted of 20 enhanced humans and modified fighters, and 3 frigates equipped with Ghost Protocol. The Valthic fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel and immediately began scanning the station. They detected the human civilians. They detected no military presence. Their scans showed empty space. The trap sprung with perfect precision. Dong-hyun's forces materialized from quantum hiding at point-blank range. The Valthic ships barely had time to raise shields before the first attacks hit. But these weren't conventional weapons. Dr. Hyorin's Biological Warfare Division had created something special. Nanoscale machines that could pass through energy shields because they were so small the shields couldn't detect them. Once inside a Valthic ship, they went to work. The battle lasted exactly 8 minutes. Not because the Valthic ships were destroyed that quickly, but because they stopped fighting. The nanoweapons had reached the Valthic crews and begun rewriting their neurochemistry. Fear. Pure, overwhelming, paralyzing fear. An emotion the Valthic had not experienced in their 40,000 years of galactic dominance. Their warriors, trained to be fearless, found themselves unable to think, unable to act, barely able to breathe. They simply stopped. Dong-hyun's forces boarded the disabled ships methodically. No Valthic survived to send a distress signal. The humans took everything: technology, star charts, intelligence data, bodies for study. Then the Valthic ships were destroyed so completely that not even debris remained. 30 ships vanished without a trace. The Imperium didn't notice immediately. Space was vast. Ships went missing occasionally. But when 3 more harvester fleets disappeared over the next month, High Chancellor Vorth took personal interest. He summoned Admiral Kith, the Imperium's greatest military mind, and gave him command of a subjugation fleet, 5,000 warships, enough firepower to sterilize 100 planets. Find Earth, Vorth commanded. Make an example of these primitives. Show the galaxy what happens to those who resist classification. Admiral Kith was not like other Valthic commanders. He had studied military history across thousands of species. He understood strategy and tactics at levels most of his peers dismissed as unnecessary. The Imperium usually won through overwhelming force. Kith knew that sometimes overwhelming force wasn't enough. Something about this situation troubled him. 4 harvester fleets gone without trace, without even a distress call. That suggested planning, preparation, perhaps even superiority in some areas. His fleet jumped into human space with caution. They found the outer colonies apparently abandoned. No life signs, no active systems, empty worlds that had held thousands just months ago. Kith ordered deep scans. His analysts reported strange readings, thermal signatures that appeared and disappeared, gravitational anomalies that made no sense, energy spikes in places where nothing should exist. They're here, Kith said quietly. We just can't see them. He was right. Squadron leader Ji Woo commanded 40 frigates hidden in quantum superposition throughout the system. She watched the Valthic fleet on sensors that could detect the universe without being detected in return. 5,000 ships, impressive, terrifying, but they were blind. They couldn't see what was right in front of them. Wait for them to spread out, Jiwoo ordered through the quantum neural network that connected all enhanced humans. Let them think they're hunting us. Then we show them who the real hunters are. The Valthic fleet divided to search the system. Hundreds of ships moved independently, scanning, probing, searching for any sign of human presence. They entered the Kuiper Belt, that vast field of ice and rock at the edge of the solar system. Perfect place to hide, Kith thought. He ordered his ships to sweep the area thoroughly. The darkness came alive around them. 40 human frigates materialized simultaneously from quantum hiding. They didn't fire weapons. Instead, they launched Dr. Hyorin's payloads, nanoscale machines programmed with one purpose: make the Valthic feel fear. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. 5,000 ships suddenly crewed by beings who had forgotten how to feel terror were now manned by creatures experiencing primal fear for the first time in their lives. Valthic warriors screamed. They clawed at their consoles. They fled from shadows. They couldn't think, couldn't plan, couldn't fight. The most powerful fleet ever assembled by the Imperium became a floating mass of panic. Admiral Kythe, through sheer force of will and mental discipline, managed to resist the fear long enough to understand what had happened. These humans had weaponized emotion. They had turned psychology into warfare. This wasn't just military defeat. This was something far worse. The Imperium had based its entire civilization on the idea that they were superior beings, advanced beyond primitive emotions. The humans had just proven that wrong in the most devastating way possible. His flagship was boarded by Lieutenant Subin and her Special Forces team. They moved through the corridors like ghosts, their enhanced bodies allowing them to survive in conditions that would kill normal humans. They found Kythe on his bridge, the only member of his crew still conscious and functional. The rest cowered in corners or had fled. Subin approached the Admiral carefully. She held no weapon. She didn't need one. "Admiral Kythe," she said in flawless Valthic, "I have a message from President Haywan of Earth." Kythe looked at her with something like respect. "Deliver it. You classified us based on our history and biology. You judged us inferior. Let me offer a correction. You are the ones who have been classified. You are classified as extinct. You simply haven't realized it yet." They let Kythe go. One ship, one survivor. He returned to Primus' throne alone, carrying the recordings of what had happened. High Chancellor Vorth watched in horror as his fleet was reduced to helplessness by an enemy they couldn't even see. He watched his warriors, proud soldiers who had conquered 1,000 worlds, reduced to whimpering creatures afraid of shadows. "We must abort the human subjugation," Kith said urgently. "They are not what we assessed. They are not primitive. They are not inferior. They are predators wearing the mask of civilization. If we continue this war, we will lose." Vorth saw only failure, only fear, only weakness. He had Kith executed for cowardice and treason. President Haywan stood in the war room deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by holographic displays showing the approach of the Grand Armada. 50,000 Valthic warships moving toward Earth like a wave of death. Any normal civilization would have surrendered. Any reasonable leader would have sought terms. But Haywan was not interested in surrender. She was interested in sending a message that would echo through the galaxy for the next 40,000 years. General Tai Min spread tactical maps across the holographic table. He was old now, gray-haired and scarred from a dozen conflicts, but his eyes burned with cold fury. "They think this is the final battle. They think they're coming here to exterminate humanity. They're wrong. This isn't the end of our war. It's the beginning of theirs." Commander Jae-sung entered the room carrying a data tablet. His special operations teams had been busy for months, infiltrating deep into Imperium space using captured Valthic vessels. They had planted something on 16 major Valthic worlds, something Commander Jae-sung called humanity's seeds. Now those seeds were ready to bloom. "Everything is in position," Jae-sung reported. "When you give the word, we can activate simultaneously across 4,000 light years. Every major Imperium world will receive the transmission at the same time." Haywan looked at the data on the tablet. It was elegant in its simplicity. Not a weapon that destroyed bodies, but one that destroyed beliefs. Dr. Youngmi had helped design it after studying Valthic psychology and culture. The Imperium maintained control through ideology. through the belief that the Galactic Codex was ancient truth, that the classification system was based on natural law, that some species were simply born to rule while others were born to serve. It was all a lie. Commander Jae Sung's teams had raided the deepest archives on Primus' throne and found the truth. The Galactic Codex was not written by enlightened ancients. It was written 300 years after the first Galactic emperor conquered his neighboring worlds. It was propaganda designed to justify conquest and slavery. The classification system was not based on evolutionary science. It was based on military power and political convenience. Species were classified as inferior not because they were inferior, but because they were conquered. Activate the seeds, Haewon ordered. Let the galaxy know the truth. Across 16 worlds, billions of Galactic citizens and countless trillions of enslaved beings received the same broadcast simultaneously. It hijacked every communication network, every display screen, every data system. The message was simple and devastating. It showed the real history of the Imperium. It showed the Codex being written by politicians and generals, not philosophers and scientists. It showed classified documents where Galactic leaders discussed which species to classify as slaves, based purely on their ability to resist militarily. It showed genetic studies proving that there was no evolutionary basis for the classification system. For 40,000 years, 2,000 enslaved species had been told they were inferior, that their bondage was natural, that the Galactic were simply better, more evolved, more worthy of dominance. In one moment, that entire foundation crumbled. The slaves learned they had been lied to. The Galactic citizens learned their civilization was built on fraud. The galaxy would never be the same, but Haewon wasn't done. The information warfare was devastating, but the Grand Armada was still coming. 50,000 ships carrying weapons that could turn planets into dust. Admiral Tae-yang commanded Earth's defense fleet from the orbital command station. 2,000 warships, not enough to win through conventional warfare, but Earth was far beyond conventional warfare now. The Galactic fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. They formed their traditional battle formation, a massive wall of ships designed to intimidate and overwhelm. High Chancellor Vorth commanded from his personal supercarrier, a vessel the size of a small moon. He opened a communication channel to Earth. "This is your final chance," Vorth's voice boomed across space. "Surrender now. Accept your classification. Your species will be permitted to survive as slaves. Resist and every human world will burn." Admiral Tae-yang responded calmly. "High Chancellor, your empire is already dead. You just haven't noticed yet. Let me educate you on what happens when you threaten humanity." The battle began in the Oort cloud. The Galactic fleet advanced with absolute confidence. They had numbers. They had technology. They had experience from 10,000 conquered worlds. They had no idea what they were flying into. Dr. Minho's second project activated. 10 million enhanced humans across Earth and its colonies, connected through quantum neural networks. Not losing their individuality, but sharing processing power, tactical awareness, and reaction speed. 10 million minds thinking as one distributed intelligence. Every human pilot, every gunner, every tactical officer suddenly had access to the combined knowledge and reflexes of 10 million enhanced humans. The Galactic fleet suddenly faced an enemy that thought faster than their computers, reacted before sensors could track movement, and coordinated with perfect precision. Every human ship knew what every other human ship was planning before they planned it. They moved like schools of fish, like flocks of birds, like a single organism with 2,000 bodies. Pilot Hyunwoo, one of Dr. Minho's first successful volunteers, flew his fighter toward a Galactic dreadnought that was 1,000 times his size. The dreadnought's point defense systems activated, filling space with enough firepower to vaporize 100 fighters. Hyunwoo dodged every shot, not because he was skilled, though he was. Not because his ship was advanced, though it was. He dodged because 10 million minds were calculating firing patterns, predicting trajectories, and feeding him perfect flight paths faster than the dreadnought's computers could adjust. He fired a single missile. It seemed impossible that one missile could threaten a ship that size. But the hive mind had analyzed every scan of Galactic dreadnoughts for months. They had found a design flaw, a tiny weakness in the reactor shielding. The missile struck exactly at that point. The dreadnought's reactor went critical. The massive ship tore itself apart from within. Across the battlefield, the same scene repeated thousands of times. Human ships that should have been helpless against Valthic technology were systematically destroying vessels that outmassed them by factors of thousands, not through superior firepower, but through perfect knowledge, perfect timing, perfect execution. The Imperium's traditional tactics of overwhelming force meant nothing against an enemy that could predict and counter every move before it happened. High Chancellor Vorth watched his Grand Armada being torn apart and felt something he had never experienced before: doubt, fear, the understanding that he had made a terrible mistake. He activated the Stellar Destabilizer, a weapon mounted on his supercarrier. It was designed to destabilize stars, turning them into supernovas. He would kill Earth's sun and every human in the solar system, even if it meant his own fleet's destruction. Lieutenant Subin had been waiting for this moment. Her infiltration team had hidden aboard Vorth's supercarrier since before the battle began, using Ghost Protocol to remain undetected. They had studied the ship's layout during the journey. They knew where Vorth would be. They knew where the controls for the Stellar Destabilizer were located. They struck with perfect timing. Vorth's guards never saw them coming. Enhanced humans moving faster than normal reflexes could track, using weapons that disrupted Valthic nervous systems. Within minutes, Subin's team had control of the bridge. Vorth stood alone, surrounded by humans who should have been primitive slaves. "The weapon is disarmed," Subin reported calmly. "Chancellor, you have a choice. You can die here now meaninglessly, or you can do something that might save some of your people." "What do you want?" Vorth asked, his voice hollow with defeat. Subin activated a device that Dr. Minho had designed specifically for this moment. "We're going to upload your consciousness into our network. You're going to experience what your empire has done for 40,000 years. Every species enslaved, every world conquered, every individual life destroyed by the Codex. You're going to feel all of it. 40,000 years of suffering compressed into 1 hour." Vorth tried to resist, but enhanced humans held him in place as the device activated. His consciousness was ripped from his body and thrust into the quantum network. He experienced the life of a Keltheran child, genetically modified by the Imperium to be docile and stupid. He felt the despair of a Reth warrior, forced to enforce laws he knew were unjust. He lived through the death of entire civilizations that resisted classification. He felt it all. Every moment of pain his empire had caused. Every life ruined by his decisions. When his consciousness was returned to his body 1 hour later, Vorth was no longer the proud leader of a galactic empire. He was a broken being who finally understood the cost of his civilization's existence. With trembling hands, he opened communication channels to every Valthic world, every Imperium military installation, every ship in his fleet. "This is High Chancellor Vorth," he said, his voice cracking. "I am ordering the immediate cessation of all hostilities against humanity. I am ordering the complete surrender of all Imperium forces. The war is over. We have lost. We have always been lost. We just didn't know it." The Valthic Imperium collapsed overnight, but the aftermath took years to unfold. 2,000 enslaved species didn't just rebel. They erupted with fury that had been building for millennia. On worlds across the galaxy, the enslaved rose against their masters. Some uprisings were peaceful. Others were not. The Valthic, who had ruled through fear and ideology for 40,000 years, now found themselves helpless as the foundation of their empire shattered. Diplomat Yunji arrived on Primus' throne 3 weeks after the surrender. She led Earth's delegation to meet with what remained of the Valthic High Council. The great chamber where Captain Day One had first heard humanity classified as slaves was now surrounded by human warships. The power dynamic had reversed so completely that some council members wept openly. Arbiter Quen, the scientist who had delivered humanity's classification, knelt before the human delegation. His silver skin had dulled to gray. His 3 eyes looked hollow. "We beg for mercy," he said in a voice stripped of all pride. "The Empire is gone. Our people are scattered. We ask only to be allowed to survive." Yunji looked at him with cold fury. She had lost her brother in the New Busan abduction. She had watched recordings of Valthic harvester ships herding humans like animals. She had studied reports of what the Imperium had done to 2,000 species over 40,000 years. Mercy was not the first emotion that came to her. "You will receive exactly as much mercy as you showed the species you enslaved," she said quietly, "which is to say your fate will be determined by law and justice, not by revenge. We are not the Imperium. We do not classify beings based on whether they are useful to us. But make no mistake, there will be a reckoning. The Galactic Justice Commission was established on an orbital platform above Geneva. Judge Jinnah, formerly of the International Criminal Court, was appointed Chief Justice. She had spent her career prosecuting war criminals and human rights violators. Now her courtroom would decide the fate of those who had committed crimes on a galactic scale. The trials lasted 3 years. Over 10,000 Valthic officials, military officers, and civilians were brought before the court. Each trial was broadcast across the galaxy so that every species could witness justice being done. The proceedings were meticulous. Evidence was presented. Witnesses testified. Defense attorneys argued for their clients. Everything was done according to law, not vengeance. Dr. Hyorin testified about what she found in Valthic genetic archives. The Imperium had not simply enslaved species, they had modified them, deliberately altered their genetics to make them more compliant, less intelligent, easier to control. The Keltheran, she explained, had once been a species of warriors and philosophers. The Imperium had modified their brains to reduce cognitive function and suppress aggressive tendencies. What the galaxy knew as Keltheran slaves were actually lobotomized versions of what they had once been. This is not just slavery, Dr. Hyorin said, her voice shaking with anger. This is genocide. They didn't just take freedom. They took potential. They took the future these species could have had. They rewrote evolution itself to suit their convenience. The gallery of observers included representatives from hundreds of formerly enslaved species. When Dr. Hyorin finished her testimony, the silence was absolute. Then a Keltheran in the audience made a sound. Not words. A howl of grief and rage that spoke to loss so profound that language could not contain it. Arbiter Quen was found guilty of crimes against sentient life on a scale that had no precedent in any legal system. His sentence was delivered by Judge Jinnah with absolute clarity. You will have your consciousness copied and uploaded into a simulation. In that simulation, you will live the life of every single human you classified as a slave. You will experience their abduction, their fear, their loss, their suffering. You will live thousands of lives, each one ending in the horror you condemned them to. And when you have finished experiencing what you did to humanity, you will experience what your empire did to every other species. Billions of lifetimes of suffering. That is your sentence, Quen collapsed. He begged for death instead. Death was denied. The sentence was carried out the next day. High Chancellor Vorth received the same sentence, but on an even larger scale. He would experience not just the lives of those his empire directly harmed, but the compounding effects. The children who grew up without parents. The cultures that were erased. The potential that was destroyed. Trillions of lifetimes compressed into a simulation that would feel like eternity. But the collapse of the Imperium created chaos as well as justice. General Taemon's forces spread across former Imperium space, trying to stabilize situations that threatened to spiral into genocide and civil war. Some formerly enslaved species handled freedom well. They formed governments, reached out to neighbors, began rebuilding. Others, traumatized by millennia of oppression, struggled. Some turned on each other. Ancient feuds suppressed by Valthic rule reignited. Most troubling were the Imperium loyalists, species that had benefited from the hierarchy and feared its loss. The Reth had served as enforcers for 10,000 years. They had been rewarded with territory and privileges. Now they faced punishment for their complicity. War Master Kulth, leader of the Reth military, refused to surrender. He rallied 15,000 ships from various loyalist species and declared that he would restore the Imperium. The galaxy needs order, Kulth proclaimed in a broadcast to all worlds. Without the Codex, there is only chaos. The humans have destroyed something they do not understand. We will restore what they broke. The Liberation War culminated at Primus Throne. Kulth's coalition fleet arrived to retake the Imperium's capital world. Admiral Taeyang led the defense, but his fleet was no longer just human. 50 formerly enslaved species fought alongside Earth. Each brought their own capabilities, their own technologies, their own reasons for ensuring the Imperium never rose again. Captain Daiwan, the diplomat who had witnessed humanity's classification years ago, now commanded a battle group that included humans, Keltheran, Vrish, and a dozen other species. His ship had been modified with technology from 6 different civilizations. His crew spoke 8 languages. They represented what the galaxy could become if it moved beyond the Codex. The battle was brutal. Kulth's forces fought with desperate ferocity. They knew that defeat meant facing justice for their crimes. They had everything to lose. But they were outnumbered and outmatched. The galaxy had changed. The enslaved had become liberators. The classified had become free. Day-Wan's ship was crippled by a direct hit from a Wrath dreadnought. Kulth's boarding teams breached the hull and fought their way to the bridge. They found Day-Wan wounded but alive, surrounded by his mixed-species crew. The Wrath commander raised his weapon to execute the human captain. A Keltheran warrior moved between them. Not the docile, compliant Keltheran that the Imperium had created. This was a Keltheran who had undergone genetic restoration. Dr. Hyorin's team had reversed the modifications, returning the Keltheran to their original form. What the Wrath commander faced was not a slave, but a predator that stood 7 feet tall with natural armor and claws designed to tear through metal. The Keltheran didn't speak. He simply roared, a sound that came from a throat genetically engineered by nature, not by slavers. The Wrath boarding team broke and ran. They had spent 10,000 years suppressing species like the Keltheran. They had forgotten what those species were before the Imperium broke them. The battle ended with Kulth's flagship surrounded and disabled. The War Master was taken alive and brought before the Galactic Justice Commission. His trial was different from the others. Kulth had not designed the system. He had simply enforced it. He had believed the lies he was told. That made him complicit, but in a different way than Vorth or Quen. I did what I thought was right, Kulth testified. I believed the Codex, I believed in the natural order. I was wrong. I know that now. But I believed I was bringing order to chaos. I believed I was serving a just cause. Judge Jinnah considered his words carefully. Belief does not excuse harm. Ignorance does not excuse complicity. But intention matters in justice. You will serve 500 years imprisonment. You will spend that time learning the true history of the species you helped oppress. And if you live through your sentence, you will spend the rest of your life helping to repair what you helped destroy. President Hay-Wan stood in the throne room of the former Imperium and addressed the galaxy. Every species, every world, every survivor of 40,000 years of tyranny watched. Some had suffered for generations. Some had nearly forgotten what freedom meant. All of them wanted to know what came next. The Valthic Empire classified us as slaves because we were violent, primitive, and unworthy, Hay-Wan said. They were right about one thing. We are violent. But they misunderstood what that meant. Our violence is not weakness. It is the rage of the oppressed, the fury of the free, the wrath of those who refuse to kneel. We turned that wrath upon an empire that had enslaved 2,000 species for 40,000 years. We did not do this to rule you. We did this to free you. What you do with that freedom is your choice. But know this, humanity does not forgive slavery. We do not forgive oppression. And we never ever kneel, the galaxy erupted in response. 5 years after the Imperium fell, the galaxy looked nothing like it had for 40,000 years. The rigid hierarchy was gone. The Codex was history. 2,000 species that had been classified as inferior now governed themselves, formed alliances, and explored possibilities that had been forbidden under Valthic rule. The transformation was messy, chaotic, and beautiful in ways the old order could never have been. Engineer Su-Jin stood in a laboratory that orbited a world called Kelthera Prime, watching through observation windows as the latest restoration was completed. Inside the sterile chamber, a Keltheran child underwent the genetic reversal process. The modifications that the Imperium had forced on her ancestors for thousands of years were being undone. When she emerged, she would be what her species had been before they were conquered and broken. How does it feel? Su-Jin asked through the communication system. The child looked at her hands, flexing claws that her genes had always contained, but the Imperium's modifications had suppressed. Like coming home to a place I've never been, she said softly. Like remembering something I never forgot. The Restoration Initiative had processed 89 species so far. Each one was given a choice. They could keep the modifications the Imperium had forced upon them, if those modifications had become part of their identity. Or they could reclaim their original genetic heritage. Most chose restoration, but some didn't. Earth respected both choices. Freedom meant the right to choose, even if that choice seemed strange to others. Dr. Minho had refined Project Ascension into something safer and more accessible. The enhancement technology that had been rushed and dangerous in the desperate days of the war was now reliable. Humans and other species could choose to undergo enhancement if they wished. Some did. Others preferred their natural state. The choice was theirs, and that choice was what mattered. The Concordance replaced the Imperium. Not an empire, but a democratic union of free species. Every member had equal vote regardless of size, technology, or military power. Diplomat Yunji served as humanity's representative, but Earth deliberately avoided leadership positions. President Sung Ho, who had succeeded Haewon after her retirement, made Earth's position clear in his inaugural address. We did not free the galaxy to rule it. We freed it to give everyone the same thing the Imperium tried to take from us: choice, self-determination, the right to decide your own future without someone else's classification, defining what you can become. The Concordance faced its first major crisis when 17 species demanded the complete extermination of the Valthic race. The debate in the assembly chamber was fierce. Representatives who had lived under Valthic oppression argued that allowing them to survive was too dangerous. What if they rebuilt? What if they tried to restore the Imperium? How could the galaxy risk it? Judge Jinnah, now serving as a special advisor to the Concordance, stood before the assembly and spoke words that would define the new galactic order. If we commit genocide against the Valthic, we become what we destroyed. We prove that might makes right, that fear is justice, that classifications are necessary. The Imperium said some species deserve to die because of what they were. If we say the same thing about the Valthic, we validate everything the Codex stood for. The vote was close. Mercy won by the thinnest margin. The Valthic survivors were allowed to live, but under strict conditions. They were confined to a single world. Their technology was restricted. Their activities were monitored by peacekeeping forces drawn from 50 species. Most importantly, their education system was completely redesigned. Valthic children would learn the true history of their empire. They would understand what their ancestors had done and why it was wrong. A generation later, young Valthic expressed shame for what their civilization had been. They volunteered for restoration initiative work. They studied the species their empire had oppressed. They tried in small ways to make amends for crimes they had not personally committed, but whose legacy they carried. It wasn't redemption. Redemption wasn't possible for what the Imperium had done. But it was something. A recognition of harm. An attempt to be better. Dr. Young Mi, now leading the Concordance Science Alliance, made a discovery that shook the foundations of the new galactic order. While studying ancient archaeological sites on former Imperium worlds, she found evidence of previous civilizations. The Valthic were not the first galactic empire. They were the third. 2 others had risen and fallen before them, each lasting between 30,000 and 50,000 years before collapsing. She presented her findings to the Concordance Assembly with a warning that echoed through the chamber. The pattern is clear. Empires rise. They conquer. They establish rigid hierarchies. They become convinced of their own superiority. And then they stagnate. When crisis comes, when change is needed, they cannot adapt. They shatter. President Sung Ho looked at the data with concern. The Concordance is not an empire. We're a democracy. Yes, Dr. Young Mi agreed. But we must remain vigilant. The danger is not in what we are now, but in what we might become. We must ensure the Concordance never becomes rigid, never becomes convinced we have all the answers, never stops questioning and evolving. The moment we do, we'll repeat the pattern. Captain Bora commanded the exploration vessel New Horizon, crewed by members of dozens of species. They traveled beyond known space, seeking civilizations that the Imperium had never contacted. They found 36 pre-faster-than-light species developing in isolation. Each discovery prompted fierce debate in the Concordance. Should they make contact? The Imperium had contacted humanity and immediately tried to enslave them. Would earlier contact have been better or worse? Should developing species be left alone until they achieved faster-than-light travel naturally? What if they faced extinction before they reached that point? Commander Jae Sung, now retired and teaching at the Concordance Military Academy, gave his perspective during the debates. We should remember how the Imperium found us. They contacted us, judged us, and condemned us. If we contact pre-FTL species, we must come as friends, not judges. We must offer help without demanding submission. We must respect their right to develop at their own pace. The Concordance adopted the observation doctrine. Pre-FTL species would be monitored but not contacted unless they achieved faster-than-light travel naturally. or faced an extinction-level crisis that they could not solve alone. It wasn't perfect. Some species might benefit from early contact, but the alternative was risking another Imperium, another set of classifications, another 40,000 years of oppression. 20 years after the Imperium's fall, a probe returned from deep space carrying a message that changed everything. Dr. Hyo-Rin decoded the transmission in her laboratory, then immediately requested an emergency session of the Concordance Assembly. What she revealed made the Valthic Imperium look like a minor threat. The message was from an automated beacon launched by a dead civilization beyond the galaxy's edge. They called themselves the Fourth Galaxy. 800,000 years ago, something had come to their galaxy. Something they called the Hunger. It consumed everything. Stars, planets, entire civilizations. They tried to fight it, but their weapons were useless. They tried to flee, but it was faster. In the end, they launched warning beacons, hoping that other galaxies might prepare for what was coming. The Hunger does not negotiate. It does not communicate. It simply consumes. We could not stop it. Perhaps you can. Prepare or perish. The Concordance chamber erupted in panic. Some representatives demanded immediate mobilization. Others insisted the message was too old to be relevant. What if the Hunger had died out? What if it had moved to another galaxy? What if it was a hoax? Admiral Tae-Yang, now in his 80s but still commanding the Concordance First Fleet, addressed the assembly with the authority of someone who had fought the Imperium and won. When the Imperium called us slaves, we responded with wrath. We broke an empire that had stood for 40,000 years because we refused to accept their judgment. Now we face something that destroyed an entire galaxy. I say we respond the same way. Not with fear, but with defiance. If the Hunger comes, it will not find a divided galaxy of slaves and masters. It will find a united galaxy of free people who have already proven that nothing is inevitable. The Concordance authorized the greatest mobilization in galactic history, not to conquer but to defend. Engineer Su-Jin led the development of new technologies that combined knowledge from 2,000 species. Weapons, shields, and propulsion systems that made Imperium technology look primitive. They didn't know if it would be enough, but they would try. Dr. Minho's consciousness enhancement technology was refined to its ultimate form. Volunteers from every species in the Concordance underwent the process. They became the Vanguard, an elite force that combined human adaptability with the strengths of hundreds of other species. Warriors who could think faster than computers and coordinate across light years through quantum neural networks. Captain Daewon, the diplomat who had witnessed humanity's classification so many years ago, now commanded the Concordance First Fleet. 10,000 ships representing every member species waited at the galaxy's edge, watching, preparing, hoping the Hunger would never come, but ready if it did.